What the hell is going on in my state of California? Why don't we have election results yet? It's a great question. Remember when you used to turn on the TV on election night, and by the end of election night, maybe even over dinner, you had a pretty good idea of who was going to win? And then over time, that sort of bled into very late at night, and then sometimes it bled into the next morning, right? You woke up the next morning and you had a new president. That's changed over time, and when you have a state as large as California, people get annoyed that they don't know what's happening, and again, they think that it means something untoward, and so they get mad at us, and they want to know what the hell is going on over there. So that's what this episode is about. It is definitely a departure from my normal content, and Persona is not even here. I decided to just do this one on my own. But if you're interested in it and you want to know what's actually happening, then, this is for you. I am an election worker, and I have actually managed the polls at several elections. I've worked every election since the 2016 presidential primary, which in California is a bunch of elections, right? We've had primaries, we've had presidential elections, we've had midterm elections, we had a special election to potentially recall our governor, we had the Prop 50 election. I worked a lot of elections, and I think I have a pretty firm grasp of the way things are run here in California. And I can especially speak to, with a great degree of certainty, how things run here in San Diego County, which are indicative of the rest of the state, given that why we do things the way we do is driven by state law. What am I going to talk about? First off, I'm going to talk about just why things are working the way they are, specifically changes that we made in the election law back about 6 years ago. And one of the things I hear is Florida does mail-in votes. Florida could do it in a day. Why can't California? There's also this thing called the red mirage. The red mirage is a real thing, and I can explain why it happens and that it's not fraud. Sorry to disappoint some of you. For example, we saw it in the gubernatorial primary, where initially the Republican candidate, which was Steve Hilton, was ahead, and then the Democratic candidate, Becerra, pulled ahead of him in the polls. So that they call that the red mirage. Why does that happen? And why doesn't any of this mean voter fraud? And by the way, if you want to reach out to me, if you want to talk to me, if you want to interview me to talk about this somewhere else, I'm more than happy to do that. I believe in what we're doing here in California. Not everything, okay? I'm not just because I live in California doesn't mean I like everything. I don't like this. I don't like having to explain things like this. I don't like the fact that, my family from afar. I spoke to my father earlier today, and the first thing he said is, how's the counting going, right? I don't like that. I don't like the way it makes us look, but at least I think I can speak to it from a certain degree of authority. How did we get here? So what happened is we made some changes in the election law that allowed us to send a ballot via mail to every registered voter. Prior to that, you had to actually register for mail-in voting the way it is in Florida, right? Where you have to actually request. You didn't need a reason, but you did have to request in advance to get a mail ballot. I did. I had a mail ballot prior to this happening. But then we started mailing ballots to every registered voter. And this was done at the time. COVID had a lot to do with it. The idea was that people didn't want to go to the polls, and so we wanted to allow people to vote. And then it worked. And so we continued, right? We basically continued this process. It wasn't done via any sort of executive decision. We voted on this idea. We put this into law that we could do this. And the way California law is that as long as the ballot is mailed and postmarked by Election Day, specifically by 8 p.m. on Election Day, and it's received within 7 days of the election, then it will be processed. So that's the two big things and that's really what we're talking about here. We also made some other changes, which at least here in San Diego, we went with what we call the vote center model, where we went with a smaller number of digitally connected vote centers versus the thousands of small places like garages where you had to go to a particular person's, typically like a person's garage, and you would vote in person, and you had to go to a particular precinct because the printed voter roll, that's where that was. You saw your name, you signed your name next to that, and then voted. The downside to that was if you couldn't get to that one particular location, you either couldn't vote or you had to vote provisionally, which nobody wanted to do, right? Because it makes your vote take longer to process and such. So we went with this vote center model where you can go to, I believe it was around 280 vote centers in San Diego County, where you could go in person. We have an electronic poll book. That poll book is directly connected via secure connection to the registrar of voters. You log in there and you get a paper ballot, and then that paper ballot is then treated just like every other paper ballot. That was another change we made. But both of these things, the reason why I mentioned that other change, even though it's not relevant to this particular discussion, is that both of these things were done to increase voter access, to make it easier to vote. We went with up to 11 days of early voting, which I'm sure some of you think is ridiculous, but that's what we did. We went you can vote up to 11 days early at these vote centers. And that was done to accommodate different people's working schedules and things like that. But the big thing, and the thing that's really relevant here, is this mail-in ballot, right? It makes it super easy. Basically, all you have to do is mark your ballot, drop it in the mail, done. You can just do it right at your house, drop it in your mailbox, and off the ballot goes. You can also drop it at a vote center. You can drop it at a library. There's all of these drop boxes that are not handled by the mail system. They're handled by the registrar of voters, or the ROV, as I may call it. So some of you might say, well, you're not the only state that does mail-in ballots. What about Florida? Florida has mail ballots, and they manage to process them roughly by election or maybe the next day. So why is it that California is so messed up, is basically what some of you might say. Here it is. When you look at specifically Florida versus California, law is very different. With Florida, your ballot has to get there by 7 p.m. on the night of the election, or else it will not be processed. So if you mail the ballot, even if you mailed it early enough for it to normally get there, and then the mail service is late and delivers your mail ballot the day after the election, it will not be processed. Okay. That's just the way Florida law works. Whereas in California, as long as you mail it or drop it off by 8 p.m. on the election day, Friday, then it will be processed. The signature will be verified and all that stuff, but it will be processed. And I think those big differences between two laws really explains what's going on here. And that is the vast majority of voters in Florida, because they know if they don't mail it in time, their ballot is not going to get counted. They mail it early because they don't trust the mail system. And so they either drop it off in person early or they mail it early. And they do that because of that hard, fast deadline. In California, I think because they know that it's going to be up to a week, and they know that, generally speaking, the Postal Service is going to deliver things within a week, they wait until the last possible minute. And I have data to back this up. But so what people do, because I've spoken to them, is they watch the polls. Let's say, for example, you're Republican and you were interested in Steve Hilton and Chad Bianco. As the polls sort of got closer to the election, it looked like Hilton was going to have a much better chance of winning. And so you might say, well, I like Chad Bianco, but I'm going to vote for Steve Hilton instead because he has a much better chance of winning. And because, by the way, this is also really important, California runs on we call it the jungle primary. The top two getters of votes are what goes to the actual election. Which means that you're not guaranteed to get a Republican or a Democrat in the election. There was a time not that long ago
but it looked like we might have two Republicans in there. It looked like it might be Hilton and Bianco as the two people in the election. There would be no Democrats. And this was because we had the guy that dropped out, and we had 50 something Democrats running for governor, and that they were splitting the vote between all. So there was this worry that that there was going to be no Democrats, and then the Republicans are now starting to worry that there's going to be no Republicans. It's because there's a jungle primary. Okay, so people were saying you really ought to use your vote strategically, and so they waited until the last few days before the election to see how are things shaping up. And they see, by the way, this is based on polls, not election results, because we do not reveal the election results until after the close of the election. So just based on polling, people were saying, okay, Hilton is looking better on the Republican side. Becerra is looking better on the Democrat side. I'm going to cast my ballot for one of those because that's, this the side I'm on, and I don't want to, quote, waste my vote on somebody that's not going to win. So all of that put together means that a whole bunch of people cast their ballots at the last minute, and they either dropped it off at a ballot station, or they either dropped it off at a vote center or a drop box, or they dropped it in the mail. And so the result was, when you look at, again, I'll speak to just San Diego County. When I looked at the number of ballots, it looks, based on what I saw, that they can process about 80,000 to 100,000 ballots per day in San Diego County. This is verifying the signature, right? The ballot shows up, they take an image of that signature across, that's on one side of the ROP. On the other side, there's this large room full of people who are just doing this. They have an image of the signature from the ballot. There's a barcode that identifies who that ballot is associated with, which then allows the system to pull up all of the images that they have on that person. And then they do a signature verification. So they're doing that one ballot at a time, one person at a time. And they can do about 80 to 100,000 ballots a day. And they'll start processing them as soon as they come in. But the problem is, we got, in San Diego County alone, we got 800,000 ballots, and most of those came in, based on what I saw, most of those, about 600,000 of them, my best estimate, 600,000 of them came in on or about the day of the election. And so they're processing them at about 80 to 100,000 ballots a day. And as of this recording, which is Sunday, June 7th, they still have about 200,000 ballots to go. Because again, 80 to 100,000 a day. And that's why it's taking so long. Is it because of the way the laws work and because of the way the voter behavior is? The vast majority of them show up at the last minute, and then we have to process them one by one. This isn't about counting. Counting will take minutes. Literally, once they get all of these ballots, as soon as they process ballots, the counting is done automatically. That's done via, machines that count ballots, okay? Then there's what's called the red mirage. What is that? This really started happening back in the 2020 election. And I'm going to make some statements that some of you won't agree with, and that's fine. But just a statement of fact is that President Trump, as it looked like he might lose the 2020 election, he made a number of statements that were very much against mail-in voting. Since that day and all the way up to today, right, President Trump has continued to be against mail-in voting, or at least mass mail-in voting the way we do in California. He doesn't like it. And he's made his followers know that he doesn't like it, which means they tend to vote in person. I see it myself when I work the polls. A lot of people make it known that they're Republican and that's why they think they should vote on election day and they should think they should vote in person. They're not a big fan of the mail-in ballots. So what that does is that those ballots, they either vote very early or they vote in person, which what that does is it creates a big batch of early ballots that are counted because the votes that go to the vote centers get counted first. And so you get a scenario like you had with our governor race, where initially Steve Hilton was out ahead. And then as they continued to process, the mail ballots were disproportionately Democratic. And so then Becerra pulled ahead. It's not due to fraud. It's just due to the fact that more Republicans vote in person or early, and the Democrats vote generally by mail and are often being very strategic as to when they mail their ballot, and they often mail it very late. That's all it is, right? So that's what the red mirage is about. But this process simply takes a long time. Like I said, in San Diego County, they're doing 80 to 100,000 signature validations every single day. And they've got about 800,000 to get through. They started a few days before elections. It looked like ballots started showing, the vast majority of ballots showed up a couple of days before the election. They processed those. They continued another 80 to 100,000 a day. They've got about 200,000 left. And so I would estimate by possibly late Tuesday, maybe early Wednesday, they will have processed all the signatures. Counting the ballots is easy. That goes very quickly. And then what happens is you have the unofficial count, right? The news will report on, the news is already reporting that Becerra is going to advance the general election. That is the news, and that is a statistical probability, not anything official that comes from the state. But then what happens is, and I think it's important for you to understand that we do use computers to count the ballots, right? But here's the thing. It's a trust but verify. There's a Ronald Reagan quote for you there. What if there's a supply chain attack on the systems that count the ballots? What if when they count, they throw every third ballot or whatever, right? And this was something that was alleged back during the 2020 election and it was alleged a lot. And so how do we validate that? That's what the 1% is for. So the 1% check, we pull roughly 1%. I say roughly 1%. It's because it's based on pulling of cartons, not ballots. I don't want to go into too much detail, but roughly 1% of the ballots. And then those ballots are counted carton by carton, ballot by ballot, and compared against the machine results for that carton. And it's done by human beings, one person sitting at the head of the table reading the ballots, right? And then two other people doing a manual tally of each race, right? And then they add it all up. And then this person gives their number, this person gives their number, and then this should match the results from the machine. If they don't, then guess what? They do it all over again. And so any of the kind of things that California is being accused of, and other systems are being accused of, this would find any systemic issues. So that takes time, right? Verifying, in the case of San Diego County, 800,000 signatures takes time. By the way, I did see another number, and that was that only 30,000 ballots today, which is, let's see, by Friday. So we had the election on Tuesday. So Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, only 30,000 ballots were received after Election Day. We're talking 800,000 ballots, most of them received before Election Day. So it's not even this whole thing about whether we should or shouldn't get ballots after Election Day. The problem is human nature is causing them to wait till the last possible minute, causing all the ballots to show up all at the same time, and then we got to verify them, and it takes a long time. So that's why what is happening is happening. And, just a couple of things. Again, California is following California law, right? I think it's also important to note other important things that, like, no ballot is ever left in the custody of one person. There is a chain of custody for every single ballot from when it's created to when it's transported to what we call, which is DART, which is a centralized team that then takes the ballots for that. So in our area, I was at Bondsville. Our DART team is in Fallbrook. We have two people that leave our vote center at the end of each day to take the ballots and escort them over to a team of two who are then they're collecting the ballots from that area, and they take that and take it down. So it's always two people with the ballots. And also the ballots are tracked from each vote center has three numbers that they get to check. We know we have a number that shows us how many people checked into the electronic poll books, the EPBs. We have a number that shows us how many people printed ballots out from the BMPs, the ballot marking devices. And then we have how many ballots are physically in our hands. And those numbers should all match, right? And we also seal, by the way, we seal the cartons before they leave, right? So there'd be no way for, even if two people wanted to somehow collude and stuff ballots. So the numbering wouldn't match, the seal would be broken, the seal is signed by everybody. There's a chain of custody from the moment that ballot is created to all the way into the end over there in the ROV. I saw some crazy things in the last couple of days following stuff on Facebook. One of them was about our newest law, which, they said, well, it prevents outside people, prevents law enforcement from observing the election. That is nonsense. That is not what that law said. What the law said was that what that sheriff did in Riverside County, I believe it was, where he seized the ballots and had them in his own possession outside of the ROV. That's what we specifically made illegal. We basically said that is illegal to seize ballots in that way. But guess what? That same sheriff could come. You can go. Any person, including law enforcement, including anyone who distrusts the systems, can go to at any point and observe the system from beginning to end. And by the way, we get observers all the time. So the entire process has a great chain of custody, has observers all the time, has people digging into the numbers to figure out, if anything like dead people voting, that whole thing. But I just had a discussion online with somebody who's like, yeah, but dead people are getting ballots because of the way we do things. Yes, dead people are sent. They're not getting ballots, but they're sent ballots. But here's what's not happening. The dead people aren't voting. You don't have to trust me. Go check out the Heritage Foundation. They did an investigation into a whole bunch of things, and they didn't find this kind of stuff. There's allegations that this is happening all the time, and it just isn't happening. At least not in any significant numbers. To do, did one or two, what dead people vote? Possibly, but because basically where that even could happen is where you get a ballot. It would have to be really purposeful, but if a quote unquote dead person could try to vote by, let's say you have a husband and wife, the wife has passed, the husband gets the ballot, and he signs his wife's name. Theoretically, that would cause the dead person to vote. But guess what? That's not happening, right? What could happen is you could see someone trying to vote and just grabbing their wife's ballot. But guess what? Each mailed ballot has a barcode that identifies what voter that is. So if he opens up the wrong ballot and signs it, then that would look like a dead person tried to vote, when in reality it was just a person grabbing the wrong ballot. The signature wouldn't match, so ultimately that person would not get to vote. Anyway, I hope this is helpful. I just wanted to help explain why is California so different than, let's say, Florida. There is a significantly higher number of votes. There is a significantly higher percentage of votes that come in by mail. 80% in California versus 21% in Florida from the last election that I could get numbers for. And because of the way the laws are, they come in at the last minute. And it takes a long time to do signature verification on millions and millions of votes. If you have questions, post them on YouTube. And I hope this helps. That's a wrap.
The Backup Wrap-Up is written, recorded, and produced by me, W. Curtis Preston. If you need backup or DR consulting, content generation, or expert witness work, check out backupcentral.com. You can also find links for my O'Reilly books on the same website. Remember, this is an independent podcast, and any opinions that you hear are those of the speaker and not necessarily an employer. Thanks for listening.